Fitting into the number 9 spot like a perfect jigsaw puzzle piece, I got together with Ava Fields to talk about the movie. As a media artist and community leader, Ava positions her work as immersion therapy, an untapped resource for prioritizing underrepresented communities/voices. Her award-winning content house, The Horror Advocate, creates pop culture resources focused on the nexus of horror and social justice. The Horror Advocate provides consulting services to help educators, civic leaders, and community organizers implement film literacy as part of their efforts to impart change. In February 2023, the Mass Cultural Council recognized the Horror Advocate's mission of meeting inequalities at their root rather than their symptomatic effect as a cultural influence on MA culture. The Horror Advocate reframes and repurposes traumatic content through innovative community response models, demonstrating the transformative impact of blending horror film, equity, and compassion. The objective is to transform antiquated social structures that thrive on harm and starve survival. Recently released content includes the Horror Advocate's Guide to Streaming with Intention and the early stage development document for the DEI Film Archive mobile application. She hopes people experience the same catharsis she does creating it. I loved having Ava on the show, and we had a fun time talking about the movie
Pieces.
Warning, what you will see in the movie Pieces cannot be revealed, cannot be described, cannot even be imagined. And you don't have to go to Texas for a chainsaw massacre. Pieces, it's exactly what you think it is. Pieces, absolutely no one under 17 will be admitted.
You ready to do this, Ava?
Yep.
Are you ready to talk about Pieces?
It's the best. I watched it this morning just to remind myself how much of the best it was.
Well,
with my partners.
Thank you for coming on Cradle to the Grave, Ava. It's really awesome to have you here to chat about horror with me. The horror genre is my favorite genre. Is it your favorite genre? Have you always been a fan of the horror genre? Tell me about it.
Yes, my entire life. Like some of my earliest memories are like throwing an apple at my neighbor who was trying to scare me. He was dressed up as Freddy Krueger. I was really little. I honestly like super little, so I don't remember, but that's one of my first like memories and also stories that my family tells about me is when I wasn't afraid and just threw an apple at his head. So that so I've like always been my thing. My dad was a huge horror fan. He died when I was really young, so like I feel like I kind of just like adapted those things from him. So it's definitely my favorite genre next to like crime or like serial killer stuff. So
what are some of your earliest memories of the horror genre? Was there a film that you saw maybe too young that kind of scarred you or led you down the path of horror?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like my mom maybe really early on knew that I very, very much understood the difference between like what was real and what was not. I feel like she trusted me really early to like think through those things myself. So I did watch them very early in life, but my first memories are definitely watching Nightmare on Elm Street with my childhood best friend, who is still my best friend. That was one of the first movies like we ever watched together. I have really clear memories of watching Jaws with my sister. Very little. We like shared a room together, and I remember watching it super close. That's also how I found out I needed glasses because I was like this to the screen. So that's also how we figured that out. But yeah, so it's definitely like all of my earliest, like really I love movie memories are definitely horror films without question. Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street, since I've been doing this podcast, I chatting with all different types of people from all walks of life. And a lot of them cite Nightmare as really the gateway into their love for horror. It came out at mid 80s. People were kind of getting a little tired of slashers back then.
Yeah, it was definitely a dying period of like.
And then here comes Freddy. Freddy came along and man, just kind of was a shock to the genre.
Definitely the personality aspect, because like before that, you don't really have that. Like you kind of do with like Bela Lugosi. Like you could definitely with Dracula. I feel like here and in the UK, like you could definitely argue that character like held the spot for that until Freddy. Of like your personality is almost bigger than what we're seeing. Like it's a bigger part of the horror, or like what we're trying to create. because between that and like, yeah, then Freddie was just so huge. I mean, like kids could like him, and I think it made it easy for kids to watch it. Like,
Yeah.
because it wasn't as scary to a kid, but also like terrifying to a kid, and something an adult could just enjoy for like all the different aspects, the movie
Mhm.
making, the lines, the jokes that a child would never get, that as an adult I was like, oh, I understand now. Yeah, just a great movie. Really awesome.
Yeah,
I
you're
miss
right.
Wes
You're
Craven.
right.
So,
Freddy had the personality.
yeah.
Before Freddy, slasher villains, they didn't have a personality. I
No, or a
mean,
face half the time. I
or
mean, like,
they had a mask on.
yes.
Freddy just he let it all hang out.
Yeah, which is
And
what I love
he
about his movies. Yeah, it's very like,
yeah.
it's confrontational in like this totally different way. And I think especially given like the backstory of like who he is and what happened, and then you have no disguises, no masks. It's kind of like this is the effect of this person on society, and this is what it looks like to deal with them. And what does that feel like for you if you're supposed to be a normal person who's non-violent or something? Like, what does that come back as? How does that haunt you? So I think it's also just way more complicated than they were doing for a while too. Like for a while, it was just straight
Sure.
murder, and I think
Ah,
Freddie Wicker brought us back to like
yes.
there are ways that we can talk about like bigger issues with these movies, and we are
Mhm.
just lost without Wes Craven. Like I am still not over that because he's
I
just so
know.
great. He was like definitely one of my favorite directors. Like when I really started to get into that, I was like
Mhm.
him and Dario Argento were the two that made me be like, yeah, this
Yeah.
is much bigger than people like understand it to be as like a genre. So
Now, I've heard you say in one of your videos I was watching that the slasher genre is your favorite.
yeah,
Is that
absolutely,
correct? Why
absolutely without
why are you attracted to the subgenre of slasher as opposed to a haunted house subgenre or vampires or werewolves? Why what is it about the slasher that kind of
yeah.
attracts you?
I think for me, like so much of what I love about horror in general is because of slashers. I like
Mhm.
the truth. I enjoy being confronted with my actual existence, especially as a woman. Like I appreciate that they're not packaging my existence up in some way that makes it not real. Like the things that you see in a slasher film are about as real as it gets. And I just think if that's the actual threat, why would I want to like look away if I'm actually trying to deal with this? That goes into like a lot of my work is just about you have to like confront the things that are horrible because there's absolutely no other way to process them or potentially change them, get in front of them, whatever you're trying to do. If you continue to like shield yourself, and I also think it's kind of like a disservice to other human beings. Like slasher films to me are a service to the many missing, like murdered, abused women of decades and like
Mhm.
centuries. It just feels this is like the reality. So to turn away to me would almost be a disservice to another human being. Like, why do I get to shield myself from what someone is going through right now? Like, this is a movie, but this is like someone is going through this right now. And like,
Sure.
if I can't actually do anything, then at least I can absorb this moment, potentially like absorb some of that pain, some of that knowledge, and maybe like disseminate it in a way that makes sense. So I feel like that's sort of my liaison activity. I feel like I'm able to stomach those things. And so maybe I can like make them palatable for someone who doesn't understand why
Yeah.
I'm in that place, but could understand if I'm able to spit it back. And I think that's what all my work is about. Like, I'll go do that part, but like, you have to be willing to listen and understand and maybe like take some of these lessons and thoughts into your everyday life because that's what's going to actually do something. Plus, they're fun. I mean, it's just the
Yeah,
truth.
they are
So,
fun.
like, they're fun. They're more fun than others. Like, when me and my boyfriend just watched the remake of Sorority Row, which not a
Oh,
good movie, but super good kills. And like, there are so
there
few
you go.
people on the planet who understand when you're like, there's great kills in that movie.
Oh, for
So,
sure. And we're
so
actually going to talk about a movie that's very similar to that. I like how you bring in this therapeutic aspect to the genre that it gives you. Yeah, I think that's great. I've been doing this podcast for almost a year now. And
wow.
I always ask people why they love horror. What do they get from it? What's their history with horror? And it's becoming obvious to me that it offers therapy in a way where we can throw in a movie and sit on our couch in our house and deal with some
Deal with it.
shit, deal with some shit that we're going through
Yup,
uh,
safely for everyone.
safely
Like
through
that's
art.
the thing.
We're watching works of art, watching
Yep,
people who have created something that, in a way, is helping us process this
big
thing
time.
called life, right? And
Yes, I'm like, I don't that other stuff doesn't do anything for me. The fantasies and the wishes, like, no, I need to know actually how to get through this right now. So I need help.
yeah,
Like,
and the horror genre, I think it stands alone in
yep,
that aspect,
yep,
and
you
that's
know what?
why we love it.
Yep.
Well, like I said, we're here to talk about a movie that has great kills, but maybe not a great movie. But we're
It's
I
a
mean,
tough one. Like, if you're not a horror fan, I'll forgive you for not
oh,
loving this one.
so
Like,
Pieces came out in 1982. It is a Spanish American slasher film directed by Juan Piquer Simon. Hopefully, I'm saying that name right. And it's starring Christopher George, Linda Day, Paul Smith, and the plot follows an unknown assailant killing female students at a college campus in Boston who uses their body parts to make a human jigsaw puzzle. So,
so good.
Ava, tell me, what did you think about Pieces?
Okay. Well, honestly, I forgot how much I loved it, and it was like fun to watch it with Rob because he's probably only seen it maybe one other time, so just to be able to have that experience with someone who hasn't seen it that much too. But I mean, it's definitely one of the best if we're just talking about horror's ability to take like real world things and create these like metaphors, these layered metaphors of like what's actually going on at that exact moment. So it's definitely like a perfect execution there, even though it's a Spanish film, like it's executing those things across the world because it's like that was such a unifying portrait at the time, like body part, women's bodies. Like it's probably one of the most like underrated body horror films, I think
Hmm,
because it's a slasher instead of a Cronenberg kind of body
sure.
horror. Your body's like the idea of something getting in or something happening to it in these ways, deteriorating. Like I think people forget, but it's actually probably one of the best body horrors. I just think it's so smart with the way it sets things up and how simple the plot really is. It's
Yeah.
actually a really simple idea, but it's complex in its themes and frameworks and all that is like super complicated. And so the idea of it being in Boston is also I think like super important, like Boston horror films, because I was born and raised there. So
Oh,
I
okay.
think that Boston horror films have a very specific way of dealing with like sex and sexuality for the obvious reasons of the Puritan influence. And
Mhm.
that movie is just like such a great example of all of that in those like first few minutes when it's just you're looking at that puzzle, he's doing the puzzle and you're looking at it and like it's actually missing the parts that are like actually gratuitous or like it's
Right.
missing the pieces that are actually like the parts of women's bodies are supposed to cover up. Those aren't even like done when we first see it and she like flips out. So just even that sense, it doesn't even take those parts. It's literally that you are pieces, like, and those pieces are
Mhm.
signifiers and they don't get to be like their own thing. So even in those first few minutes, they're setting that up and it just carries on through the film like so perfect until that ending shot of the body, which is
That ending, that's pretty cool. So, Pieces. I have not visited this film in years. I think I watched it way back in the days, maybe
it
late
was a lot.
80s. And it has a very giallo kind of Italian horror film, even though it's not Italian.
I
It
know. And
follows
it
those same
that
type of
up.
tropes a little bit, but it
Yep.
goes batshit bonkers when it comes to the gore. And
Yeah, you're not even ready. That's what
oh
I did. I
man.
was like, Italian? Are you sure you're not like that was what that was like.
And I like it for that. It
I
kind of
know.
just goes all in. It doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
It has some really good kills. It has a lot of gore. It also
Yeah.
has a lot of gratuitous nudity, right?
Yeah. I
But
mean, I don't know. It's like questionable. Like, I think it has to happen. See, I guess those are the places where like it's hard for me to explain to other people like why I don't think that might be gratuitous.
I was picking up what you were saying as far as like the sexual connotations of this film, pieces of a woman.
This is
What is it saying? What is it saying about that whole the subtext of that film. It's kind of reminiscent of Slumber Party Massacre. Have you seen that?
Yes. Oh, I love
Suppo-
that. I love that one. I love
a slasher movie which was written and directed by two women. Uh,
yes.
and what did that movie have to say about the male gaze when it comes to these movies? And then here comes Pieces, which just doubles down, I think, on everything.
Yeah.
They actually used a real pig carcass in one of the scenes where they
Was
chopped a
that
woman in half. Yeah.
oh wow. Okay. I would well see this is why I'm like I like that real stuff. Like I CGI definitely has a place, but I'm like, give me that like because
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
know that. Like the work that they did with nothing is like I'd rather have that a million times. Like I want the head
Oh yeah.
explosion from like Maniac. I do not
Yes.
necessarily want all these other things. Like, yeah.
Oh,
So
I'll take a head explosion in Maniac any day over a head explosion CG on The Walking Dead.
yeah, I just feel like I'm much more like mind blown for lack of a better term when I see like the one from Maniac or even the one from Scanners is more like
Yes,
exciting to
they
me.
actually, I know, like Scanners, they Cronenberg used a real shotgun for that effect. They had like a shotgun underneath the
That
table.
explains a lot.
Boom.
That
Very
explains
cool. I don't know if you can get away with it now,
no,
but it has some wacky moments. There are some wacky moments in Pieces.
ridiculous.
There's a kung fu scene in Pieces.
I was like, these are
What's
the things
going
I
on there?
can't explain.
What is going on there? Oh,
Like
tell me about that.
honestly, that moment, I mean, I guess I'm thinking too about the time period and how big that was at the time, like the idea of body movement, things that really involved you like controlling your body in our culture, like kung fu, we have aerobics, like these things are like starting to come into play where like our bodies are like the center of the universe. And I feel like that was a really awkward placement for that and also a really interesting way to sort of to introduce how bodies work in race and work in culture and how we envision different people's bodies. It's interesting because his body, like he was doing the jujitsu, or kung fu. He was doing kung fu, and he's like he's doing it with her, and she's has a gun, and so just these like juxtapositions of like you have this weapon as a woman and it's like not really like serving you actually it'd be better if you were more in touch with your body in this way but this is also something that we hold against men of this race and culture like it's almost like your body isn't held up against say a black male body in the same capacity it's almost held up more next to the body that you're like interacting with in that moment so it was just a really interesting interjection of culture, especially considering that it was like a Boston film, because I think it was important to race in Boston is a very specific thing. It's very like it's its own thing. I feel like other parts of the country you can kind of like mold and be like, okay, yes, this is how you deal with race. I feel like Boston is this complete anomaly because there's so much like education here and there's so much show it's like you have to put something up almost here so it makes race relations really complicated and I think the movie touched on that in what was probably 2-minute interaction between them and total and the fact that he's like coming after her because he's trying to defend himself like he's afraid of you like he's like what are you about to do to me and like you're like what are you about to do to me and then all it takes is for you to kick him in the nuts and he's like completely like he froze his entire body froze and he just like fell over it was like all power gone like that's all it took the gun was not necessary at all that's all you had to do and it's just such a crazy moment
It is
and
a crazy moment.
Kendall with his uselessness
There is another moment in this film which it might be notorious for out of all the moments in this film. Let me I'm gonna do this immersive
I'm
background.
trying to think
It's this moment.
Bastard!
Yes, bastard. I knew it.
Bastard! Say it with me, Ava. Bastard!
Yeah, she gave it to us like probably 8 good times. Like, I mean, it's so upsetting. And I this scene is so interesting because I felt like, is the reason that she's so upset because she was so young? Like, was this sort of like a moment of innocence being destroyed for her or something? Like, I don't know. She took it so hard. I always felt like, is that what it is? Like, You thought
It's
like
so
you could
hard.
protect her from something, and like
Oh
not only
man.
did you not protect her, like I think she might have gotten chopped up because of you, because you're here, like proximity. So it was hard for her, I think.
Yeah. Did you guess who the killer was the first time you watched this film?
Yeah, but the only reason is because honestly, because he was so much different than everyone else. He wasn't from there, so it almost was like,
Yeah.
what are you doing here? Like, how'd you get here? Like, you're not just not from Boston, like you're not from America. Like something's good.
Yeah.
So this is
I
yeah.
knew I knew it wasn't that Willard guy, you
I
know,
knew I was like, now
I
I
mean,
know for a fact that it's
come
not
on.
Willard, and I totally understand why he started fighting those cops. Like my partner was like, oh, he shouldn't have done that though. Like immediately fought them, and I'm like, no, he knew as soon as he saw that stuff and he knew who he was. He's like, they're not going to put this on me. I'm not going to jail for this. I
uh,
knew.
and you briefly touched on the end. I thought the ending was pretty powerful
It's perfect.
when that body come flipping around
Yep.
the bookcase
Yeah.
and she's made up of all the different parts from
Yep.
all the different women. That was kind of shocking. So that
Yeah.
reminded me of the end of Suspiria. You ever seen Suspiria?
That's like my favorite horror movie. Like ever. I have like a whole shrine to it. Actually, off
So
to
you know
my
what I'm talking about, where
yes.
one of the characters comes back, the lady who fell in the razor wire, and she comes back and she's
That's like
got
my
that.
favorite scene. It's so pretty.
It
That
reminded
one
me of that.
color is unbelievable. Yes, it is very similar to that. Like just this idea that it could be like stitched together, and like kind of this idea of no one woman is like unto herself too. It's like what you're perpetrating against one is being perpetrated against like all is also kind of the theme of that moment, especially considering like I don't know why he was suddenly on a police force. Like, so let me get this straight. The guy who has slept with and or been around every single victim is on the case with you. That's not someone you're worried is like doing this. Like it was so strange, but it
Yeah.
made sense in the end because it was like, yeah, exactly. Like you have contact with all these people and you're just kind of like running through these girls, and it never occurs to you like what might come after, what might have happened before, like what you might be contributing to. And so then the very, very last scene is obviously like standing ovation. Like, thank you, because Kendall, I don't even know why he was involved with the police investigation. Thank you. He's definitely like the origin, way more than like, because I think that's what they were also trying to get at is like, it seems like he's harmless, but he's not. He's not harmless. His actions are not harmless. That weird like sex scene where he was like, oh, they're gonna think that you're in bed with like Chainsaw Charlie. Like, what are you talking about? But if she was just laying there doing absolutely nothing, I'm sure you'd be offended. This is crazy. Like he just yeah. His energy was weird all over that.
It was. And then the corpse grabs his junk at the end and
It's like not a grab. Yeah, no. But I was
oh.
like, really? Oh, dude, you know what kind of movies I watch. So yeah, he was like, it's not just
I
like a grab.
know.
Like it was
Ooh,
like gone.
that hurt. That one hurt. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Chainsawed or grabbed. Nobody was safe.
So I always like to end the chats with the review, but you know what? I'm gonna let the cover of the VHS of this movie have the review, and it basically says it's exactly what you think it is.
Exactly. I love that. I love that. Like, no, we're not. We don't do that around here. Like, it is just straight up body parts. Don't worry.
You want pieces? We got you. We got you covered.
We're not going to play with your mind.
What you want. But what's your final word, Ava, on Pieces?
I guess my final word on Pieces is that if you at all can handle gore, like you should see it. It's critically important in terms of like the genre itself. Like, is it, 4 stars on every other aspect? No, but the kills are really great and the message is extremely powerful, and you could do like endless things with this film in terms of just discussing what's going on at the time. So I definitely suggest it if you can stand gore. And I mean like gore.
Oh yeah, no,
like
this movie doesn't mess around with the gore for early 80s movie. It stepped up the game, man. It goes all in.
I'm into that thing, and that one's that's if I'm saying like be cautious, it's pretty serious.
Well, cool, Ava. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me about this fun film. It is a movie I think everybody who is a fan of slashers should watch.
Important.
I think it has its place
Yeah,
in the subgenre.
absolutely.
And if
Yeah.
anything, you get to see Linda George yell "faster"
And it's like
5 times in a row.
yeah, and it's worth it. It's not
It
like
is
no,
worth it.
it's
That's
worth it to see
so
it.
good.
If
So
that's
good.
all you came for. Like, it's worth it.
Right on. Well, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.